Night three of the Republican National Convention was, of course, a bunch of people on stage lying through their teeth about the wonderfulness that is Donald Trump and the state of this nation that we all expected it would be. Come on, you didn't expect these people who haven't displayed a shred of humanity to suddenly grow some human cells, did you? The GOP isn't any different from the DNC when it comes to pandering to specific voter bases by trotting out people to talk about how this party was trailblazing champions for the underdog. So for the GOP, there's been a lot of focus on Black people and women. Now, the Black folks who find comfort in the classist bubble of the RNC of the Republican Party do so because the proximity to power and the money they make ignoring racism helps them ignore racism. But the GOP also has a woman problem because they're desperate to keep women voters. So when you think of Trump's tweets about protecting the quality of life for suburban women, even while he used the outdated term soccer mom to refer to them, the parade of women touting Trump's advocacy of women in his administration during this convention suddenly makes sense. Because according to a Wall Street Journal poll compiled in August, Biden leads Trump in women voters by 21 percentage points. And all the women speakers were saved for last night, specifically because yesterday was the 100th anniversary of the formal adoption of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which removed the ban on white women being able to vote. And I said that intentionally, not because I'm extra snarky today, but I am extra snarky today, but because that's actually true of the 19th Amendment. It didn't extend the right to vote to Black women, Indigenous women, Chinese women, Japanese women, just white women. And it definitely didn't extend the right to vote to men in any of those groups. So it's particularly ironic that the Trumpublican women would champion women's suffrage on a night that was the anniversary of a victory for white women's suffrage only, because really, that's what those women and this whole convention is really about. And it's funny because the Black speakers at the RNC are also serving the purpose of reassuring those same suburban white women that Trump isn't a monster and that he can protect and save their way of life. I mean, look at all these successful, intelligent, articulate, non-threatening Black people who don't hate law and order and who love the American way and they love success and they love money, standing in front of you saying that Trump isn't racist. Because those speakers are involved in this convention, not only as outreach to potential Black voters, but also to those white women voters who may have also been turned off by Trump's racism. See, he can't be racist. Look at all these nice Black people saying that the racist things he's done aren't actually racist. So as we all watch the women speakers extol the virtues of a Republican women's liberation version of Trump, we should keep in mind that liberation has only ever been intended for white women, and the Republican version of it is particularly aligned with acceptance of certain stereotypical patriarchal ideologies, like the support of a leader who is a strong, masculine man's man, but only if he's white, because a Black man who's like that is a threat. Black men in the GOP have to also be deferential to that kind of white male leadership, hence Vernon Jones's comments about Trump being a man's man. The belief that women can be in management positions, sure, but as a support to strong male leadership, the strong focus on traditional gender roles in regard to sexuality, relationships, and family, and the absolute merciless destruction of anyone who challenges their white supremacist patriarchal version of women's liberation. That's really all you need to know about all those women who spoke on behalf of Trump and women's empowerment last night. They're pretty much the modern day equivalent of the slave master's wife. She had slaves too. And speaking of race, that's all this focus on law and order coming from the GOP is. That's all it ever has been when racists use it. And make no mistake that these people are blatantly racist, from politicians who promised a return to law and order in the streets during the years of social unrest as Black, Chicano, Indigenous, gay, and transgender people fought for our rights, to Today, when these jackbooted thugs in suits are using the same rhetoric that they know will resonate with the people who voted for them in the first place, those are the only folks they're really talking to. When Pence and the rest of the GOP talks about law and order in cities where these protests are happening, they aren't talking about addressing the lawlessness of the police departments that's gone unabated for decades that's led to these protests. They're not talking about the civil rights and the constitutional and the human rights abuses. They're talking about the protests themselves. And they are specifically talking about property damage and protecting property value, as the profit off of property is definitely a high ideal in a capitalist society. But the protection of property and property values from Black people in particular is a specific trope used in the language of white supremacy. And this rhetoric is merely a continuation of the sentiments of J. Barry Mahol, the mayor of Baltimore, who in 1910 passed the nation's first municipal segregation law. Mahol, ironically enough, was considered a progressive of sorts. He was an advocate of women's suffrage and alleged social justice, and his apartheid law was meant, he said, to preserve peace, prevent conflict and ill feeling between the white and colored races in Baltimore City, and promote the general welfare of the city by providing, so far as practicable, for the use of separate blocks by white and colored people for residences, churches, and schools. But the real intent behind the laws was revealed when Mahol said that Blacks should be quarantined in isolated slums in order to reduce the incidence of civil disturbance, to prevent the spread of communicable disease into the nearby white neighborhoods, and to protect property values among the white majority. Poverty and inequality imposed upon Black people were issues that were not addressed by Mahol's law, nor are they addressed by any of the law and order and protect the suburban way of life rhetoric that has come from Trump and the GOP today. And honestly, not even really by the Democrats. They're sticking to their white supremacist script by focusing on protecting white property values from marauding, diseased hordes of Black people. Pence notably recognized the sister of a federal cop who was killed during the uprising in Oakland as he talked about this violence that Trump is going to stop by bringing law and order back to the streets of American cities, clearly trying to connect that murder to the protesters. But what he didn't mention was that it was white supremacists who committed that murder. But the truth isn't something that's necessary to appeal to an already rabidly racist base. That's the RNC convention. That's why they exist. Follow Luqman Nation on patreon.com/LuqmanNation for lots of great content.